Well, as we near the end of October, there is plenty to talk about and take a look at when it comes to the weather. Let's dive in. Joining us now, Eric Snodgrass with Nutrient Ag Solutions for our weekly weather update. Eric, hope you had a great weekend. Let's start just with the hurricane that is in the Caribbean and talk about the impacts here. I know it's been all over my news feed all weekend. Jamaica, especially, really going to get hit by this Hurricane Melissa. Any impacts to the U.S.? What's the latest you've seen there, Eric?
Yeah, it's been an interesting year. For the most part, for many people, it'll be a forgettable hurricane year. This is the only system to develop into the Caribbean, and the Gulf only had Barry sneak through and Chantel kind of start, but they were weak systems. So here's Melissa comes in, from the east and has spent the entire weekend over some very, very warm water, intensified to Category 5 strength this morning. It's at 160-mile-an-hour winds. The Hurricane Hunter just went through right before you and I recorded. So I'm anxious to kind of see what the data look like, but the outcome will be the same, I think, regardless of the minute details. And that is parts of Jamaica will not only experience Category 5 strength hurricane winds, which will be incredibly devastating, but it will also experience what could be, I don't know what else word to use, but catastrophic flooding. Now, the only good thing is Melissa didn't get there fast, which means there's been time to prepare, knowing that this hurricane was going to do this. It's been 5 or 6 days now that we've had a pretty clear picture that Jamaica was going to be in the crosshairs. But Jesse, we're going to be talking about feet of rain. It is going to be incredible. And then it's going to go hit Cuba, the eastern side of Cuba. But because of this huge system that's coming through the United States, which is going to massively cool down the eastern part of the United States, heading toward this holiday weekend, we're going to kick any system that tries to come through out. This Melissa is the very, very low probability of impacting the U.S. There's an outlier solution that takes the remnant moisture from Melissa rather than running it off over toward Europe, pulling a little piece of it into like the Canadian Maritimes, but it's an outlier solution. But the reality is this is going to be a devastating event in that region.
Well, our thoughts with everyone that is in the line of Hurricane Melissa. You mentioned, though, that system coming through the U.S. that's going to kind of drive Melissa away. Let's talk about this a bit. I know a couple different pieces here. You mentioned the cooler temperatures coming in. I know we've had some rain in the south here over the last several days as well. So walk us through kind of this week's setup here in the U.S., Eric.
Well, I'm very happy with the rains that came through the south, even though some of it was kind of with some severe weather in Texas, earlier in the weekend. The rain that did get through there is hitting a region that I'm very concerned about for all of winter. Okay, so the concern in the south is we have a La Nina. If there isn't good jet stream flow coming out of what we call the subtropical jet. So the jet hits us from two angles in a normal winter. There's a polar jet and there's a subtropical jet. During El Nino years, which we're not in, but if there was, we just get clobbered from both. During La Nina years, we tend to have the northern branch, but not the southern. And if the southern branch isn't there, then the southwestern United States, the Sun Belt, getting into Texas to the lower Mississippi River basin, which we call the Cotton Belt, into the southeast, which is still part of the Cotton Belt, but that whole region just tends to have increased risk of being drier. So the weekend storms that went through there needed every bit of it. And it's now just moving slowly through the mid-south. It's going to get over into the southeast, over to the Carolinas. Now, what I was hoping on last week was that the system following it, coming out of the northern plains, was going to be able to sync up, be a large system that lingered in the southeast, and then roll north. It's not going to work that way. One system's going to cut out. That's going to be a system that goes ahead of Melissa. And then the big low comes in, dives into the mid-south. So it's going to bring rain to you and me midweek. We're here in the Midwest, mid-south. And then that one's going to roll up the East Coast. Now behind it, as we lead in toward, Halloween, there are more systems. And what they're wanting to do is, because I told you the South is kind of out of the flow, they're coming in the Northwest. They're making a big rain shadow effect in Montana, which is where I'm going to head up to today. So we're going to talk about drought when we get there. And then they develop later. So they're developing more northern plains, Midwest, and then they dive through the Great Lakes and head northeast. So what does that mean? That means we have a pretty narrow corridor of wetter weather, and it's primarily going to be confined to pockets of Midwest, Mid-South, Northeast. We're drier farther to the south. We're drier into Southern California. And they're getting worried about this because last fall was very dry for them too. And if you remember, by the time we got into January, We had this massive fire risk, the Palisades fires, one of the most expensive natural disasters in U.S. history.
Mhm.
So we're wondering, how close to that pattern are we going to be over the next 3 months? Now, I mentioned the rain. There's going to be some snow in this. I think that some folks in the upper Midwest, the Northeast, some of the Canadian Prairie, Ontario, Quebec, they're going to get some of their first snows of the season. I'm not talking about inches. They're just going to see some snowflakes. And the temperature is going to be plenty cold enough to support it. And while we did see some lake effect rain over the last 5 or 6 days, we might be talking about the chance of getting a little bit of early lake effect snow. Now, remember, November and December are the big months for lake effect snow because you have really warm lakes and you have brutally cold air that can come down. Doesn't mean it will. But I just want to tell you this, since we got into this stuff on the drought in the South, okay? Let's just paint a scenario. I went back and I looked at all of the years that were really dry in the lower Mississippi Basin and surrounding states.
Mhm.
And I said, well, what was going on? Like, did the pattern look anything like 2025? And the answer was it did. So there is risk of that. Now, what I don't want to see is for that to carry into December and January, February. And here's the big idea. Nobody in the Cotton Belt nobody in the Delta wants to start off a season so dry in March and April when they're trying to aggressively plant. And then no one north of that, that's me, Illinois, Iowa, Missouri, Indiana, that heart of the Corn Belt. We do not want to see the lower Mississippi River Basin dry coming out of winter and not getting spring rains. That is a top drought signal if you're in the Midwest. So this needs to be watched carefully. And if the National Weather Service and the USDA are right on their seasonal predictions down there, I think we just have a story. That's all it is right now. You got to understand a couple of big storm systems at some point in winter, or just a normal return of spring rains takes that narrative and wipes it out. It's just gone, But I think we need to keep an eye on this whole pattern going forward.
Anything with the colder temperatures coming through, snowflakes maybe out there. I would assume frost potential as
Yeah.
well, Eric.
Yeah. So midweek this week, the leading edge of some of this cold air is going to get down. It might even get into southern Texas, south central Texas. Let's be real, right? I mean, southern Texas is still very hot, but big chunks into New Mexico, the panhandles of Oklahoma and Texas. And then I do see potentially later, maybe some frost touching some of the higher elevations in northern Georgia. So that includes pockets of Tennessee, Kentucky. Maybe you just dip down there in the low 30s and you get that. We also have the risk in the Carolinas for getting frost, but this is not abnormal. I mean, it's late October. It's not, if I would have been talking about this 2 weeks ago, then this would have been much more impactful. Now, here's what's going to happen with these temperatures. There's not going to be a good call like, oh, it's just going to break off cold and stay cold or break off warm and stay warm. It's very natural for the temperatures to fluctuate a lot this time of year. So just be prepared for that. But if the South is going to be dry, remember we talked about that a minute ago. If the South is going to be dry, that is usually a mild signal for much of the center chunk of the United States, like 2/3 of the US, right? Just smack dab in the middle. We tend to be a bit more mild in our November, even December temperatures. So it tends to only be cool in the Northwest and Northeast. So we'll have to see if those analog years match up and if they make sense. But I'll just be honest with you, main focus for me over the next several months is going to be the risk south of just getting drier and staying drier.
Any updates for us on South America before we close out this week's conversation, Eric?
Yeah, you bet. So South America, the planting pace, I monitor it in Mato Grosso, biggest soybean producing state, also biggest corn producing state. They are still ahead of the 5-year average by a few percent. The monsoonal rains have kind of come in fits and starts. Both the GFS and the European model are mixed this week, but they're both wet next week. Now, November rains are critical for the establishment of that crop. And if you were looking at the European model, it's just like, here's rain for everybody but Argentina. It's just trying to bring in the moisture and leave it in place. It is a bit counterintuitive to see that in the forecast because the European model is also trying to park the MJO in phase 4-5. And if I can give you just a little snippet here, if it is their main growing season, November to March, and the meteorologists are saying MJO phase 4-5, that is a major dry signal for a lot of Brazil's growing area and wet for Argentina. Right now, we're seeing phase 4-5. History would say, that's a dry season. It's completely flipped. We're seeing drier conditions in Argentina, which means the MJO must not be the main driver in the European model. Now, why am I telling you all of this? I think the trade is going to be watching these model runs and wondering if it's going to be the GFS that wins, which is the drier model, or the European that wins. And it just could be a part of a narrative that I think folks need to watch.
Interesting things to think about. We'll definitely be keeping our eyes on it. And I know folks can go to agweather.com for more, ag-wx.com for more. Eric Snodgrass, Nutrien Ag Solutions. Thanks as always for joining us here on the show.
Yeah, you bet.